Welcome back, everybody, to the Jacksonville Jaguars franchise here on Madden 21 for the PlayStation 5. As today we kick off our third offseason in the series. Obviously, the big talking point of today's episode will be free agency, but we're also going to have trades. We're going to go over the NFL Scouting Combine. We're even going to have a mock draft in there because you guys know I love my mocks. So here's a look at the season recap tab, which was recently added into the game in their most previous franchise update. I briefly showed retirements last episode. There are a few big names in here. Nobody from our team, so everybody who was on our roster last year will be returning to the league. Going into the offseason, we have plenty of money to spend, and we're not going to waste that cap space. We are going to make big moves, and we're going to make calculated moves in order to push this team over the hump. I think this team is in a good position. We made the AFC Championship last year. We now have a franchise quarterback in Koko Nwosu, who will be entering his second season. And I think there's a lot to like with this team going forward, but I do think we are a few moves away from potentially being a championship contender. I do think we have a lot of the core already in place. Our rookie class this past season was phenomenal. Obviously, Koko Nwosu and RJ Ewell made big impacts in the backfield, but guys like Bleet Fryerwood, David Harris, Julius Williams on the defensive side of the field. Casey Shock as well. How could I forget Casey Shock? I mean, we have so many talented young players. Our oldest player on the roster is 32, that being kicker Josh Lambo. So yeah, this team is super, super young. We have plenty of draft picks. We have 2 2s, 2 4s, but no 5s. And we have all of our other regular draft picks. Obviously, expect us to shuffle around those draft picks. Entering the offseason, we have $100 million in cap space. That does not include the rookie reserve. If you subtract the rookie reserve, that means we have $91 million to spend. And before we can worry about free agency, we have to worry about the players who are already on our roster, but whose contracts are up. So, contract extensions. We have a number of big-time players in here who we're going to have to pay or let go. At quarterback, I'm not going to bring back Gardner Minshew because, well, we don't need him. Trace McSorley, I know everybody's going to want him back. Not going to re-sign him here, but I'm probably going to re-sign him in the open market. Phillip Lindsay, we just don't need him. RJ Ewell and J.K. Dobbins, I think, is the backfield for the future. Wide receiver, Hakeem Butler, he didn't really get to play a whole lot this year. We don't need him. This has been very easy so far. Now we get to Andrew Norwell, which is our first tough decision. Norwell was signed to a big contract a few off seasons back, and although he was never a superstar guard, he's been a quality starter for this team for the past few seasons. Last year, he played all 16 games, but he has had some injury issues in the previous seasons of this series. We're not going to re-sign him right now, although I am willing to bring him back on the open market. And I think the same goes for Brandon Linder. He's a good player, but like Norwell, he's not getting any younger. Both guys are now reaching the wrong side of 30, and I don't want to give them long multi-year contracts, so I'm not going to re-sign them now, but I am open to bringing both Norwell and Linder back in the open market. We are going to re-sign some depth offensive linemen. Guard Bo Knowles and tackle Kevon Winslow are back. We need depth on the offensive line. Those guys aren't going to start, but they'll still be useful. Taco Charlton didn't really play. I'm going to let him go. Right end, it gets a little bit more interesting. And we start with Fuller Reynoso Fadukazi. He was signed to a one-year deal last offseason. He did a fine job as a rotational pass rusher in the middle of the defensive line. He had 5 sacks. I'd like to bring him back 1 year, $2 million. He says no, so he gone. Ifeadi Odenigbo is a very similar player. Odenigbo has gotten most of his snaps as a rotational pass rusher at defensive tackle. Odenigbo did not play a lot this year. I think he only played 4 or 5 regular season games. He was banged up all year. And even when he was healthy, Fuller Reynoso Fadukazi did get snaps over him at times. But the past 2 seasons, 6 sacks in season 2, 7.5 in year 1. I'd like to bring him back, but we're only going to offer 1 year for $1.8 million. He accepts, so Ifeadi Odenigbo will be returning to the Jaguars. Let's move forward now to defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins, who we signed to a 2-year contract back in the first offseason. Rankins was fine in year 2. This year he got hurt, I believe, in week 4 and did not return. So, Sheldon Rankins, can we trust him to stay healthy and stay on the field? He's not getting any younger. He's 29 years old now, and I don't really have interest in re-signing him. I think we're going to let him go. I do want Garrison Matthews back, though. He was an undrafted free agent. I think he's pretty solid. He'll be brought back on a one-year deal. We signed Sam Alford last year in the offseason. Alford did not touch the field. He was on injured reserve all year after getting hurt in the preseason, but I would like to bring him back, and Sam Alford will be returning. At corner, there's Damon Arnett, who was a bust with the Raiders. Didn't really get a whole ton of playing time here, except for special teams. I think we're going to let him walk. Safety, Geno Stone will be brought back on a one-year deal for depth. I really like Geno Stone a lot. He's a poor man's version of Rashawn Babineau, which is important because if Babineau were to get hurt, I think Geno Stone could step in as a sub-linebacker. That brings us to the special teams with kicker Josh Lambo and punter Brian Amaya Jr., both due for new contracts. Lambo's been very good. He only missed 4 kicks this past season. He only missed 5 the year before. But Josh Lambo doesn't really make the big kicks. That's the thing with Lambo. He's a good kicker, but in crunch time, he's not always clutch. So I'm willing to bring him back on the open market, but I don't want to re-sign him for a lot of money now. I don't want to let Brian Amaya go. He has superstar development, which for a punter is pretty key. He's also a good passer. I know this doesn't seem totally relevant for punters, but we know he has a cannon for an arm. He successfully completed a fake punt touchdown against the Colts back in Week 13, even though it won't show up on the box score, which is dumb. But I want to retain him long-term. We're going to offer him 5 years for $10.5 million, so that's a little bit over $2 million per season. He accepts. I think that's very good value for us. Brian Amaya Jr. is a very good punter, and he won't be going anywhere. So Amaya, Stone, Alford, Matthews, Odenabu, Winslow, and Knowles are all back. Everybody else will be hitting the open market, but there are some players in there who I am certainly willing to bring back. Brandon Linder, Andrew Norwell, for example, I certainly would not mind bringing them back. Foronoso Fadukazi is a guy I'd kind of like back. Josh Lambo, of course, would not mind bringing him back either. And then Trace McSorley as well. I know the people are going to want him, and I'm a man of the people. So we're going to simulate to free agency now. Let's see who's in this free agency class. We have over $70 million to spend, nearly $80 million. Unfortunately, the free agency class is a little bit underwhelming. Only one player above 86 overall. That is Rodney Hudson. But there are some very interesting players in here. And I think we can make do with this free agency class. For a lot of guys I like. So let's go to the center position real quick. Rodney Hudson's really good. He has 24 bids at the moment. That's 3/4 of the league. But there's Brandon Linder, who's not much worse, and he has no bids. So we might as well offer Linder a contract to bring him back. I'm going to do 1 year, $12 million. I don't want to do multiple years considering his age. A name that really popped out to me was Brian Burns. Burns is super talented. He's only 25 years old, but we don't need him. We have 2 very good speed rushers in Josh Allen and Kayvon Chason. However, Burns does not have anyone offering him, and I think good players can make it work. I don't want to offer Burns a long-term contract because this could totally fall flat on our face. So we're going to offer him 1 year for $22.5 million. I know that seems like a lot, but he'll be off the books next year, and if things don't work out, we can just let him walk. So I know this isn't a great fit, but we're going to try to make sure Allen, Chason, and Burns all reach the field. Remember when we drafted Volker Gantz back in the 7th round of year 1's draft? Well, I'd kind of like him back because everybody seems to want Josh Lambo. I don't want to overpay for a kicker, so I'm happy to bring Volker Gantz back and have him as our actual kicker. We're also going after some depth players: Antonio Gandy Golden, Nasir Adderley, Levante David, Jamal Tart, Amani Oruwariye, Oliver Giroud, an actual fullback. I don't think we've ever had a fullback in this series. Marcus Mariota, Gary Jennings, Damian Harris, Corey Ellison, Keith Barnett, Donovan Springs, Marco Sherman, Tyree Jackson, and Trace McSorley. Throw it on a dime. Like I ain't even trying. So I am going to use some Coach XP real quick. We're going to use it on defensive line for agency influence because I really want Brian Burns on the team. I know nobody's bidding for him, but it's only a 1 year deal, so I'm not totally convinced he's going to accept it. After stage 1, Oruwariye, Tart, Jackson, Barnett, Volker, Otterly, Gandy Golden, Giroux, they all accept. Sherman declines. Springs, Ellison, McSorley, and Brian Burns all do accept. So everybody there accepted except for Marco Sherman. Brian Burns is now a Jacksonville Jaguar. If you told me before I recorded this that I was going to sign Brian Burns, I'd call you crazy, but I think we can make it work with Chason and Allen. I think these are 3 very good players, and hopefully we can figure something out. Josh Allen is already really good, and I'm not really worried about him not being on the field. I'm more so worried about Chason. But I want Chason to still be an integral part of this defense because he is a super important player, and he's a super good player. So now that those guys have signed, there are still a few players left. Brandon Linder is now garnering interest because Rodney Hudson signed somewhere. Levante David, Marcus Mariota, Gary Jennings, and Damian Harris are all here. We're going to take our bid off of Marcus Mariota. I don't really want to overpay for him, so we're going to let him go. And I do want Brandon Linder back, but I do think we're going to have to overpay. So we're doing 1 year, $17.5 million. Again, I know this is a lot of money. We could do 2 years, $20 million, and he'd probably take it. But I only want to do 1 year because I want flexibility going into next offseason. So obviously the combine reports have come out. We're going to go a little bit more in depth within the next few minutes on the combine, so stay tuned for that. But let's see who accepts here in stage 2 of free agency. Levante David, the veteran, and Brandon Linder both accept. So we have our starting center back, and Levante David is now here. That leaves us with only 2 other players, Gary Jennings and Damian Harris. Nobody else is bidding for them, so hopefully we end up getting both of them. There are still a few good players left in free agency. Trayvon Mullen really catches my eye, but I don't think we're really going to bid for anyone at the moment. Daniel Jones is there as well. I think he has a bid currently from the Lions. Yuck. I would not want Daniel Jones as the Lions quarterback. So we do have 5th-year options here for C.J. Henderson and K'Lavon Chaisson. I think they're both no-brainers. C.J. Henderson's an elite corner, and I think giving him the 5th-year option is kind of obvious. K'Lavon Chaisson has really improved these past few seasons. Signing Brian Burns does make Chaisson's future a little bit murky, but I do want him on the 5th-year option because I do really like him. I think he's a really, really good player, and I do want to make sure he still gets plenty of playing time, even with the addition of Brian Burns. Simming forward now, we would get both Harris and Jennings to accept. So this means everybody we originally offered to has accepted, except for Marcus Mariota and the offensive tackle Marco Sherman. We now only have $28 million cap space, which is still a lot. And now I want to get active on the trade market. Looking at the trade block, there aren't a ton of stars, which you would expect, but there are a few very interesting players who do catch my eye, and players whom I would not mind potentially looking at acquiring. There are also players on the roster I would not mind picking up. Jeremy Watson, the Giants' backup quarterback, is here. I kind of hope someone picks him up because I think he's good enough to be a starter. Obviously, we won't. Tom Brady is also on the trade block. He's a 67 overall. I don't know how Brady decided not to retire because I feel like he has to be so humiliated that the Bucs were the worst team in the league last year. A name who did pop my attention was wide receiver T. Higgins, who had a really good season this past year for the Bengals. I don't really know why they're willing to trade him. He was a big piece of their AFC Championship team. I am looking at wide receiver, especially with Laviska Shenault's questionable future, and I think T. Higgins would be a interesting acquisition. So I do want to talk about Shenault real quick. He's a good player. 82 overall, 81 if you don't count morale with star development. He's only 24 years old, and he has a nice skill set. He has solid athleticism, he has pretty good hands, he's a good route runner, and he's really good with the ball in his hands. He doesn't really have any clear weaknesses, and he is a yards after the catch machine. The problem is, he's a free agent after next year. I don't really think I want to pay him, and he just hasn't really been all that good for us for first 3 years. And I think it's partly because we're just not a good fit for Laviska Shenault. I don't think we really provide him with what he's best at, and that's making plays after the catch. There aren't a ton of teams super interested in him, which surprises me, but someone who does make sense for him is the Eagles. They don't have a ton of talent at wide receiver, but they are a good team, and I could see them looking for a guy like Laviska Shenault. The Eagles did have a player on the trade block who interested me, that being defensive tackle Tyler Matthews. Matthews entering his 3rd season out of Utah. I kind of want a run stopper in the middle of our defense, and that's exactly what he is. The Eagles have both Javon Hargrave and Fletcher Cox over him, so we could make this trade, but I want a little bit more. I feel like the Eagles would be fleecing us, so I kind of want to add a draft pick. So I think this is a fair trade for both sides. Laviska Shenault going to the Philadelphia Eagles in exchange for Tyler Matthews and a 4th round selection. The draft pick is at 111. So we're adding another mid-round draft pick this year. We now have 3 fourth-round picks, and we have a new defensive tackle. But now that poses the question, who's going to be our new starting outside receiver? DJ Chark and Casey Shock are great, but do we have our wide receiver 3 on the roster at the moment? And the answer might be yes. I trust that Zeke Bowman could be a capable starter. He has not gotten a lot of chances to step up, but when he has gotten chances, he's made the most of them in a big way. We've had some injury issues the past few seasons going into the playoffs, and Zeke Bowman has always played well. But I do want to explore the trade market, and a team whose wide receiver room really entices me at the moment is the Denver Broncos. They have a few guys we could look at, including Joshua Thomas, who was a 4th-round pick last year. I really like Thomas's skill set. He stands at 6'4". He has great athleticism and speed. He has good hands, and he's a solid route runner. At only 21 years old, I really like his potential. But another guy on this roster who interests me is Jerry Jeudy, who hasn't really developed so far in Denver. Last season, I mentioned that Jerry Jeudy could be a trade option in the offseason, and I was half kidding, but it does make a lot of sense. Let's roll the tape of what I said last year before we played Denver. Jeudy really hasn't produced. I think he's not in a great situation, and he's kind of struggled. I don't know, maybe he could be a guy we look at in the offseason. This is sort of like how I feel with Laviska Shenault. I didn't think he was a great fit on our team, and I don't think Jerry Jeudy is a great fit in Denver, and he is what I'm looking for in a starting outside receiver. Based on what Laviska Shenault's role was, I think we're looking for someone who can run sharp routes, is reliable, and doesn't need to make a bunch of plays after the catch, which is what I think Jerry Jeudy provides. So, of these two, Judy's obviously going to be more harder to get than Thomas, and I kind of want to get Joshua Thomas as the top priority. I know Judy's the better player, but I think Joshua Thomas is more enticing. Since Thomas was a 4th-rounder last year, we are going to offer Denver a 4th-rounder, and they say no, but there is some interest, so we're going to offer them a little bit more. Pick 111, which we just got from the Eagles, a future 5th, and defensive end George Brenz are going to the Denver Broncos in exchange for wide receiver Joshua Thomas. So we now have a very interesting battle for that other starting receiver position. Chark and Shock are great, but who's going to be wide receiver 3? Is it going to be Zeke Bowman? Is it going to be Joshua Thomas? Is it going to be someone else on the roster? I really like Joshua Thomas, as I said earlier. He has great speed and acceleration. He has good hands. He's a good route runner. And he's big, 6'4", 225. He's only 21 years old. I love his skill set, and I think he really translates into what I'm looking for. He didn't really see the field a ton last year, only special team snaps. He was also on Denver's trade block, so I guess they don't really see the potential that I think he has. So now it's time to talk about the scouting combine. We're going to go briefly looking at each position, and we're going to take a little deep dive into certain players. Here's a look at Aiden Kent, the number 1 projected pick. He is quite athletic. He finished in the top 10 for everything among quarterbacks. Keith Fleming ran a 4.45. He is fast, and I think he's going to be a very interesting quarterback going into his NFL career. Looking at running back, a 7.9 combine grade for Reggie Carter. I think he's really, really good. An 8.2 for Jaquan Bridges Jr. He'd be very high on my board if R.J. Ewell didn't emerge at the end of the season. Here's Carter Westwood, a 39-inch vertical jump. He ran a 4.45. Kid's an absolute freak. 4.36 40-yard dash for Popeye Rainwater II. You think that's fast, but how about Dale McBride? 4.26 40-yard dash for McBride. He certainly made himself some money with the combine. A big 7.0 for Vincenzo Pagnotti, the top projected tight end in this class. Obviously, the offensive line class this year is weak. There are some good combines. The top centers, Benito Eng and Mike Rhodes, were pretty solid. 6.6 for Xavion Michiel. He'll probably go in the first round. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, we have some freakish athletic left ends in DeJuan Price and Amaziah Okiki. They'd be good options for us if we didn't just sign Brian Burns, so I kind of think they're unlikely. Eldridge Payne, probably the first defensive player off the board. He had a very good combine. I think he finished with a 7.6. 6.7 here for the top D tackle, Giles Warrington. I think he's a big target on our board. I think he makes a lot of sense for a team like the Jags. Looking at the linebacker position, not a whole lot really standing out. 7.1 for Bobby Tatum. He'll probably be a top 10, maybe even a top 5 pick. 7.1 for Arch Westwood. He made himself some money with the combine. Obviously, the cornerback class is loaded. A 7.6 for Jalen Garrett, but he ran a slow 40 time. So, certainly a weird combine for Garrett. 7.3 there for John Newton, fringe first rounder. Not a whole lot to talk about other than those guys. We're definitely going to be looking at safety. 6.7 for Kevin Blanchard. He ran a 4.34. A 4.42 for Josh Jordan Jr. He had a 7.3 combine grade. Darian Milton had a great combine. We won't be able to pick him, though. He's going to go probably in the top 5. Jock Valone had a 7.3. He'll be an option for our first pick. Luka Quagboo is going to be an option for our first pick as well. So there are a lot of athletic safeties, which is good because I do think we could use a safety. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a little mock draft here to share. So the top 2 picks going as expected. The 2 best players in the class, Aiden Kent to the Bucks, Carter Westwood to the Steelers. The Steelers don't really need wide receiver, but they have Steven Westwood at quarterback. I really hope they draft Steven's brother, Carter. And Carter Westwood's the best non-quarterback in this draft, so value-wise, it would make sense. I think the draft really starts at 3. The New Orleans Saints got their quarterback last year in Marcus Trotter. And they have a lot of different options they could go with. I had them selecting Bobby Tatum, the linebacker from Tennessee. I have 3 quarterbacks going in the first round. I think a team like the Titans and Broncos could consider quarterbacks in the top 5, but I don't think the next 2 quarterbacks are going to go in the top 5. The next one off the board is Jaden Gorman-Young out of Georgia. He goes 11 to Detroit. And Keith Fleming, the redshirt sophomore out of Westlake, who just led the Hornets to the national championship. I have him going 17 to the Carolina Panthers. As I said earlier, I think the Jaguars are probably going to look at defensive tackle Giles Warrington or somebody in the secondary. I have Warrington going at 13. I think that's the highest he goes. I think he could go later than that. I don't see him earlier than that. Although you got to keep an eye on the safeties. Kevin Blanchard, I have him going 19 to the Los Angeles Chargers. Jock Valone, I have going 26 to the Bears. Josh Jordan Jr., I have going 28 to the Cowboys. And I have the Jaguars getting Luke Okwegbu out of Texas A&M. We'll see how correct I end up being on that mock draft. So we're going to sim forward now. Let's take a look at what happened throughout the NFL here in free agency. Still some good players left here entering preseason free agency. We might want to sign some of these players. And then looking at our official signings, the big fish being Brandon Linder and Brian Burns, and we signed a number of other players as well. I think we had a great free agency class, and I think we made 2 really good trades today. Looking around the league, Rodney Hudson signs with the Bills. Buffalo trying to get better. Obviously, they're a big contender in the AFC. Matt Ioannidis to the Chargers. We had a lot of high-rated players go, including Philip Lindsay. He is a Cardinal. Josh Lambo to the Bucks. Sheldon Rankins to the Jets. Andrew Norwell to the Washington football team. So we had some of the highest-rated free agents leave, which is kind of interesting. Noah Fant to the Cardinals. He is going from the AFC to the NFC. Daniel Jones signs with the Lions. 3 years, $70 million. That's a lot of money for a mediocre quarterback. Matthew Stafford leaves. He is now with the Tennessee Titans. Gardner Minshew is a Raider. He'll be competing for the starting job with Derek Carr. But as I mentioned earlier, Matthew Stafford is with the Titans. He'll probably be their starter. So we're going to have to play Matthew Stafford twice a year. I think that's going to be interesting. Ryan Tannehill, I guess, will now be the backup. So that will conclude today's episode. Certainly no shortage of fireworks from our Jaguars today. We definitely have a new look roster. Next episode will be the 2023 NFL Draft. I hope you guys are ready for that one. I already recorded the draft. I recorded it when I did the free agency as well. Let me just say, we went a little bit wild in the draft, so I hope you guys are ready. There are certainly some interesting and controversial picks that I hope you guys are ready for. So yeah, I'm out. Peace.